I wanted to thank people from the Planck Center. First of all, you all need to know Carla Gower, who is our executive director. Thank you, Carla. Carla, and then Jessica White, who is also from the Planck Center. My assistant, Maureen, where are you? There you are, Maureen. She's my research assistant, and also we have an event planner, Lisa Gill. They're running back and forth between here and the Union League Club because we have a big event there, as you all know, this evening. So anyway, that's the lay of the groundwork for the meeting. Everything else is in your program book, and we're going to get the conference off and running with Ansgar first. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Ron, for introducing me, and thanks to Planck Center for inviting me to give you some highlights of a quite great new study. We just launched it last week in Europe, and we looked at leaders in public relations, in communication management. What we did is interviewing both quantitatively and qualitatively chief communication officers across Europe. And there are two questions which had been identified in previous research, and we were interested to know more about that. These are questions who are aligned to the two key issues who are really on the top of the mind in European heads of corporate communications at the moment. One is how to align communication to corporate goals, and that means nowadays obviously what can you do for your CEO, where you're reporting to, and obviously the CEO nowadays is representing the reputation of the organization. So CEO positioning, CEO reputation was one question we were going to ask in the study. And the other one, which had dropped off several times during last year in several studies across Europe, was obviously the challenge of managing international communication teams, because all these European companies are all around and going global. This is a research project that is run within the framework of the European Public Relations Research and Education Association, an organization of PR scholars across Europe. And you see that colleagues from 5 universities in Europe were involved in this project. Leipzig University was a leader in this project. It's a quantitative and qualitative study, and you will find a handout, and you will find the full report. It's much more obvious than I can present here on the internet. We did a qualitative survey among 43 global heads of communication of international corporations based in the key European markets, mostly Western and Northern European countries. You see these are large corporations, and we had open-ended questions in the summer of this year. Some of the brands, BMW, ABB, Illy, the Italian coffee maker, for example, are here. There are more, even better known brands who didn't agree to see their logos here. So you see, these are the global heads of communication who were open to speak to us. And we did a quantitative survey even 3 months earlier. It's part of a subpart of a larger annual European-wide survey. But this data here is only presented on parts of the survey, which are focusing on these two key topics and on answers of chief communication officers of corporations, so not non-profits, only corporations. And you'll see also these are listed, and private companies, mostly based, as this reflects the structure of the industry in Europe, in North and Western Europe. There's some of Eastern Europe, but obviously we don't have so many internationally operating companies in Eastern Europe. So here are some of the highlights which might give some food for thought for the discussion. First of all, obviously CEO reputation is important. 90% told us, yeah, for them, it's quite clear that the reputation of the CEO is important for the reputation of the company. But a closer look is necessary, because there's a lot of discussion in the media about CEO reputation rankings, and it's mostly based on media analysis of reputation in the media. But CCOs of these global companies tell us that it's much more important for internal communication, and that's a key answer of 1/4 of the respondents, both in private and listed companies. So change, internal culture, that's a key figure where you need the CEO to position the CEO. But then a closer look shows us that for listed companies, obviously financial communication is important, so the role of the CEO in financial communication, whereas in private owned corporations, and we have a lot of international companies based in Europe who are private owned still nowadays, it's much more important to communicate in the political field and in the public and community field. So there are quite different strategies which are not catched. That was our result today by some of the rankings we see and some of the research we do, because we simply look at CEO reputation and don't reflect it to the different strategies of these quite different companies. At the same time, we looked where there's a managing process behind that. Because if everybody says CEO communication and positioning is so important, and 8 out of 10 told us, yeah, they're working on that, they try to position their CEO. At the same time, if you look at the whole process of managing, it should start with analyzing what is the reputation of your CEO, then planning, having a strategy, having specific instruments for CEO communication, and then obviously evaluating whether you achieved something. You see that the full process isn't there, because only 2/3 have developed either specific communication strategies or instruments, and only 4 out of 10 do not monitor their CEO's reputation on a regular basis based on their own sayings. So probably, in fact, it's even less, but it means the whole process isn't there. So there seems to be a myth about CEO reputation and positioning, but not a real management process, so there's something to do, at least for some of these companies. If you look at the messages used to position the CEO, obviously these are average scores here, so it depends on the company and they have different strategies. But quite interestingly, about 1/3 position their CEOs mainly by talking about their functional competencies or about their ethical competencies, whereas being smart, personal competencies are not really a major issue across Europe. We have specific data for some large countries, and the picture there is quite different. It means if you're going to position your CEO and looking for, let's say, opportunities how to position, it also makes sense to look at different cultures and national cultures, how CEOs in general are perceived there, and this is quite different in some of the large European markets. Here, some of the qualitative quotes tell us that even if those companies who are trying to work on that, they are struggling to do so simply because circumstances are difficult. Here's a quote from a global communication manager of a very well-known brand based in Denmark, and she says, the main issue is simply we have fragmented audiences, we are active in about 20 countries around the world, this company. And even if we have a clear strategy, we need our CEO to be active, to give response, and it's simply not possible to really be there actively at the same time. So there's no real solution for that. What are, to close with this section, the long-term trends in CEO communications? The qualitative interviews showed, interestingly, there were 3 topics really popping up across these European survey. One is quite clearly the humane CEO. In many European countries, we had the tradition of having very distant, nearly invisible CEOs, not really positioning themselves until some years ago. These times are clearly gone, and it's a necessity to talk about CEOs' personalities, going up to home stories, which was a no-go and is still a no-go in some European cultures, but the demand is there. That means obviously there has to be a branding of the CEO, which is not really new, but it's not there at large. And the main problem communication leaders are talking about is that they are investing money of the company into a personal brand of CEO, and how to align that, how to talk about that, what happens if the CEO changes, how to work for, like Deutsche Bank, for example. They have 2 different CEOs at the same time, and a very strong leader of the governing board. So the CCO of Deutsche Bank really is working for 3 different people with 3 different personal brands, and he told me he never knows who of them will be there in 1 or 2 years. Probably one of them, probably 2 of them. So it's a very practical problem for these CCOs how to work with this issue. And one interesting issue, I don't know whether that's the same case in the US, for example, but that's quite clearly in some of the large European markets, in corporate citizenship, in positioning the CEO in the community, in the society. Nowadays, not only the media, but key stakeholders are looking for corporate leaders to become, like it's called here, political personae. So really playing a political role, but at the same time, not being too near to parties and to administration, which is nearly impossible, obviously. But if you do that, we have some examples and some qualitative interviews, some stories where you say there was a big thing, but then there was a shift in the government or some scandal, and the whole situation blew up. So how to integrate CorpCom and public affairs, for example, in this specific aspect seems to be an ongoing issue where these global leaders of communication are looking for solutions. You see, not only answers, it's more a picture of what's really going on and where are those CCOs are really working on at the moment. Not everybody has a solution at the moment, but I think it's most interesting for research to identify what is going on and where more research is needed. And that is obviously linked to the second topic, and it was once again said in these qualitative interviews. The main issue about that is that we are going more global, and they have to handle this issue about CEO positioning, but also other issues, obviously, on an international level. So 3 out of 4 CCOs interviewed state that international communication is important for their corporation, and the same number said that it will be even more important in the next 3 years. But the major challenges are quite simple. But all these companies obviously are communicating internationally, not only since 1 or 2 years. We are still trying to understand what is going on, to understand how to develop communication strategies with political sensitivity, if you think of Eastern Europe or Asia, how to understand public opinion and stakeholders. It's a very simple problem because service providers are not there in some Eastern European or Asian countries. So if you look at media monitoring, that's okay. If you look at a more advanced stakeholder research, it's simply a problem how to work on that with the same standards that they have developed in the key markets like in Europe or the US, and how to understand the structure of the media system. And the second topic which shows up here is the topic of management, how to manage international communication teams. We now have a clear tendency of corporations, for example, BASF in Germany, the largest chemical company in the world. They have part of the headquarters have been moved to Asia. They have a communication team of 60 people based in Hong Kong. So much more of their, let's say, support teams are going to Asia. And the main question how to develop people over there, how to integrate them, is a question where those European-based leaders see a problem, starting with the education and the salary systems and to build them back. So it means in practice there's a high personal involvement of these chief communication officers, but at the same time they report about weak organizational structures. Only half of them have solid structures and strategies at the moment, and so they really see a problem there. They're really interested to work on that. And one issue I already mentioned is about monitoring, about simply doing, they all say empirical applied research is needed. We need to understand what's going on, but you can't do it globally. You really have to work on with your local colleagues and have to integrate local service providers for monitoring, for limitation analysis, but it's not there for some of these companies at the moment, and they don't know how to develop it from the corporate headquarters. To end up, what can they do? What did they tell us? One is quite clearly to internationalize the comms function. They clearly understand it's their own job. They have to start with human resources development to source best prospective potential employees also from different countries, and to make their communication structures intercultural and global, and the whole concept of headquarters and, let's say, regional quarters is in discussion at some of the companies. So the really thing is, does it make sense? Do we have global competence centers also in communication, not only in production, they have that already, also in communication at different parts of the world? And if you have 200, 300, or like Siemens company, 2,000 people working in corporate communications, you can do that. If you only have, like, I only know the numbers exactly from German companies, like Adidas, 30 people working in corporate communications, you can't have 3 different competence centers. They're all based in 2 locations around the world. So, in the end, the long-term trend shows us that there's a paradox of centralization which is clearly there at the moment. Everybody says they want to go for one-voice strategies and to align at the moment, but the majority of the qualitative interviews told us they expect them not to last. There's a consensus that central structures will not last because corporations will not be central, and you see some of these movements with these different headquarters, and that will have an effect to the communication function. Probably, and some argue this way, that the functional responsibility to be responsible for really messaging, for communicating, and for listening, which is not there anyway in many companies, it may change, and probably communication is more general management competency for every leader, and that means communication experts will much more coaches and not so much only communicating themselves, which is a totally different job description. And last but not least, that will mean that organizational structures will probably be in the future much more arranged around key change initiatives and special projects and topics, and not so much linked to stakeholders or channels like we have today. And we have some companies who try to experiment with that, but at the moment most of them are in the centralized function, but they feel that it can't go on. So in the end, this study, and you will see the full report if you're interested in that on the web, it gives us some quite interesting insights where there are challenges, where probably more research is needed, but doesn't really give you answers on a broad scale, because these global communication leaders are identifying what they have to do, but they don't really have, or not everybody has an answer at the moment. And I think that makes it so interesting also for research and for professionals to challenge these ideas based on your own corporation or your own country or your own culture, what is going on there. Thanks for your patience.
Great. Well, thank you very much for Ron to inviting me to come all the way here from London to this event. You're going to see 2 great other reports today, other research, which have a common link, and there are 2 common links. One is both of the originators have the word doctor in front of their name, so suddenly I feel deeply inferior. My master's suddenly feels really quite second rate. The second is that both of the other studies are about the leadership of the PR function, whereas what I'm about to cover, the research that we've done at Ketchum, is about the relationship of the function to leadership. So it's almost a sort of photographic negative of what you're going to see from the other studies. Our study is a piece of research we've done for the last 2 years, looking at the views of 6,000 people in 12 countries on 5 continents around the world on the notion of effective leadership, effective communication, and how the 2 relate to each other. And I would just stress at the outset that the word leadership for us in this context is not about the leader, the CEO. Leadership in the sense that anyone, anywhere, at any level can and should be delivering leadership. And secondly, that leadership is not only by individuals, it's about leadership by brands, by corporations, and by individuals. So just to sort of define our terms, that leadership is a broad thing here, as opposed to being specifically about the leader or the CEO. So 15 minutes, 3 things. One is the extent of the crisis of leadership that we're seeing. Secondly, the role of communication in finding solutions to that. And thirdly, a point of view and approach we've been taking at Ketchum that you may just find provocative, interesting, useful, terrible. You will be the judge of all of those things. So first of all, why did we do the study? Well, when I took this job as director of our global corporate and public affairs practice 2 years ago, I was consulting with clients and colleagues, what do you want? And they said, thought leadership. So I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning worrying about thought leadership. And then I immediately thought, how many leaders wake up worrying about thought leadership? And the answer is that many. But this was 2011. This was the Arab Spring. This was the Occupy movement. This was the Indignados on the streets of Spain. And for me, the thing that crystallized the crisis of leadership was Time magazine, for only the second time in their history, making a category of person rather than an individual their person of the year. And that category was the protester. And that, for me, as I say, really crystallized the extent of that crisis. And I forgot to say, by the way, you'll see, sadly, no bar charts, no statistics, no bullet points, so it's all very left brain. For the right brain, we have a little infographic. We cater to all cortexes, is our strapline. It's not really, but you take my point. So yes, so there was this crisis of leadership that felt really rich, so we thought that's interesting. But there are also 70,000 books on Amazon on leadership. There's an entire industry, most of them on Twitter, these gurus in leadership. There's an entire industry on communication, which is ours. And so we thought, oh, well, there must be, as night follows day, huge amounts of work going on at the middle of that Venn diagram. And bizarrely, virtually nothing. So we thought, fantastic, we'll give that a go. So that's where the study was born from. Basically looking at three things. One is assessing how leaders and their communication are judged. Looking at some of the most important attributes and communication behaviours of effective leaders, crucially for us as an agency to provide counsel on what we call a path to more effective leadership and effective leadership communication. And of course, by doing it year on year as we intend to, we of course get longitudinal data that hopefully over the years provides some interesting comparative insights. So what did we find? Well, first of all, we found a crisis of leadership. In both years, less than 1 in 4 respondents from around the world felt that leaders were leading effectively. Also, a sizable gap between expectation and delivery. Last year, there was a 28-point gap between what was expected of leaders and how they were performing against those expectations. I'm not a statistician, 28 points is statistically relevant, I believe. 21 points this year, still significant, slightly down, but nonetheless something to be worried about. Also, rather like the British weather, we assume that it's going to get worse no matter what we're told. And we found that in both years, the numbers who felt that things were going to get better over the coming year were massively outweighed by those who either thought it would stay the same or believed that it was going to get worse. So actually 27% this year thought that leadership in 2013 would actually deteriorate. Only 15% thought it would get better. So a crisis of leadership, a gap between expectation and delivery. Why? What are the reasons? So one of the reasons we wanted to look into was this notion of accountability. And what we found, that almost identical to the scores on leadership, less than 1 in 4 felt that leaders were taking proper accountability when they or their organisation fell short. So we have a responsibility problem. We also wanted to look into the notion of short versus long-term thinking. And again, what we found is that with the exception of 2 categories of leaders from the 5 that we looked at, leaders were generally seen as putting the short term ahead of the long term. Interestingly, the lead category who was seen as more long-termist were business leaders, which that was counterintuitive for us. We have the stereotype that the CEO and the board are obsessed with the next quarter's results and the analyst report. The public believes, actually, the business leaders are more long-termist than any other category of leader, which surprised us, to be honest. So, moving on to what we all do, which is communication. How important is this? Well, delighted to say that above any of the other attributes of an effective leader, open, transparent communication in both years was viewed by 6,000 people as the #1 attribute of an effective leader, which is why it's so worrying that year on year we saw a 24-point drop in people's views of leaders' communications effectiveness 2013 versus 2012, and a massive 29-point gap between expectation and delivery on communication. So if we have a crisis in leadership, we also have a crisis in communication. So, does it matter, or is this just some PR firm saying, yeah, communications is really important? You would say that. Well, it's not us saying it, it's the data. However, we wanted to see, could we find a causal link between views of leaders and actual behaviour, particularly purchasing behaviour? So what we did this year was to look at whether in the last 12 months, respondents had either stopped buying or bought less from a company as a result of poor leadership perceptions, or conversely, started buying or bought more. And really striking was the stat that 60% of respondents had either boycotted a firm or bought less in the last 12 months because of poor perceptions of leadership. And what's as interesting, if not more so, is that the negative impact of poor leadership perceptions is greater than the positive impact of positive leadership perceptions. In other words, 51% bought less as a result of poor leadership, only 36% bought more. So it kind of suggests that good leadership is a table stake relative to how you operate in a crisis. So for all of those you involved in crisis, you're doing good, important work. So, moving on, who came out on top? Well, business, but very, very relatively. For example, only 34% felt that business leaders were leading well, and only 26% felt they were communicating well, which was half the number from the previous year. So, not even the business community, the winner in these terms, has much to crow about. We did a lot on vertical sectors, so we looked at 19 vertical industries through the prism of communication, leadership and responsibility. Who came out on top? Well, last year it was what we called knowledge-intensive industries, tech, telecoms, energy and so on. This year, technology was the clear winner on every metric. And I haven't got time, but we've also got data where we can drive down and work out what the specific drivers are of positive perceptions for each specific vertical. So there's quite a lot of rich data there. And then geographically, last year, Western Europe and the US were particularly unhappy compared with the other markets. This year, the US has cheered up moderately. Europe deeply unhappy. Is that surprising? Not at all, given the nature of the political and economic crisis going on at the moment. But the stats were really striking. Only 16% feeling that European leaders are communicating effectively, 15% seeing them as leading well, and 8% think that things will get better. So that was the diagnosis, and as you'll see with the two-part nature of the study, we were determined that this wouldn't be just another study that diagnoses a problem. We were determined to be, to quote Coldplay, part of the cure. Sorry for that. So a few more practical lessons that the data told us about what is the role of communications in helping to solve this crisis. Well, at Ketchum we talk an awful lot about the say-do gap and the pernicious influence that that can have on brands and reputations. And interestingly, while communication was the number one attribute of an effective leader, immediately behind that were 4 attributes that were almost entirely to do with action. Taking tough decisions, admitting mistakes, leading by example, and handling crises calmly. So although communication is an absolute imperative, substantive action really matters, and I'll come back to that as one of our core themes. We wanted to look at communication channels, which channels are particularly effective as sources of leadership credibility, and this was fascinating. That essentially any channel that involved in some shape or form the personal presence and involvement of the leader, by which I mean in-person appearances, televised speeches, broadcast, print, where obviously a leader is being interviewed, were way up there. Top was in person at 43. By comparison, social, which we spend our lives obsessing with and telling our clients is absolutely the order of the day, Facebook 17%. Advertising, hooray, 14%. Twitter, just 9%. So we had a bit of a panic last year. We thought, oh, is our advice all completely misguided? And then we realized that actually the answer is no. The answer is that irrespective of the channel, the imperative is to get the presence of the leader coming through. And we could have a whole debate about why CEO blogs do or don't work in light of those data. What does the world want leaders to do to get us out of trouble and help restore confidence? Well, first and foremost, they want honesty. 60% said they wanted leaders to be open and honest about the nature of the challenge ahead. Only 22% felt that the leaders should hold back for fear of damaging already fragile confidence. But equally, they want a clear vision for what leaders are going to do about it. But also, next in line, collaborative and consultative in the way that they arrive at solutions. And that's another strong theme that we talk about, is the potential death of the muscular hero leader. Moving from leaders to corporations, what makes a corporation be seen as a leader? Well, analysts will tell you it's quality of management, it's financial strength, it's innovation. All of those things are there mid-table, but actually in both years, by a fair margin, trustworthiness was the number one attribute of a corporation that people felt allowed it to be seen as a leader. Never have a PowerPoint slide without Bart Simpson in. That's another strapline of Ketchum. Why have I got Bart Simpson there? Because we wanted to look at sources of information on a company. Who do you view as particularly credible in forming a view of whether a company is a leader? And the answer is it's Homer, not Mr. Burns. The number one most trusted source of information is an employee of an organization who you know, followed by industry analysts and staff involved in sales, followed by financial analysts and staff involved in customer care. So there's an obvious missing piece, which is the C-suite. Where is the C-suite in all of this? The CEO, number 6, other senior management, number 7, equal with the media. So you kind of think, if your senior management are no more trusted than the media who report on you, you have an executive visibility problem. Equally, it tells us that third-party and stakeholder engagement is actually enormously business relevant. And crucially, it underlines what we know already, is that the single most powerful advocate of a company is its own employees. Hence the service value chain, hence the existence of the entire employee engagement discipline. Moving forward, we wanted to look not only this year at the static snapshot, but what's coming down the pipe. So we looked at 10 emerging leadership attributes. And again, what was fascinating is the number one attribute seen by respondents as being likely to rise up the agenda in the next decade was leaders who can build and inspire teams who together can create the future. So again, that theme of collective, collaborative leadership as opposed to muscular, heroic leadership. So we had to try and sum it up. How do we pull all this data together? And we felt that basically it's a formula, it's like a mathematical equation in that if any part of the equation is removed, the equation ceases to operate. And it's in 3 parts. One is open communication, the second is decisive action, and the third is the personal presence and engagement of the leader. So, very quickly, what does all this mean? The data's fascinating. There's some interesting pointers as to the role of communication and specific ways in which you can help restore confidence. Is this a risk? Is this an opportunity? Well, you probably know that the Chinese symbol for crisis consists of those for opportunity and risk. And our view is that this is an enormous opportunity for the comms function if we're prepared to actually listen to what the data tells us and act on it. And in doing so, we've been looking briefly with clients at what we call the 4 faces of leadership. So if you'll indulge me for a couple of minutes, since man first skinned a mammoth, leadership has been a core organizing principle of society. Leadership has always been collective. Equally, lots of academics, you'll know that's Nietzsche. Normally I do a quiz and give out prizes, but there's no time for that. The will to power. Leadership is also highly individual. People are motivated by the desire to be rich or famous or to change the world. So there's collective, there's individual.
Thinking that we want to build the show how.
Try to tweet.
That's okay. Over the last 150 years, we went from mercantile families to brands and corporations. And leadership is now an absolute brand and corporate imperative. And of course, finally, Joseph Rowntree, from the late 19th century onwards, the realization that the reason employee engagement matters is you can't actually make decent chocolate if your employees aren't fed and housed and educated and motivated. So the idea of leadership being either about the individual leader or just about one of these 4 is flawed. And we're finding it useful to think about leadership in a number of different ways. We've also been thinking a lot and talking to our clients a lot about the other age-old part of a leader's life. What do leaders exist to do, the more senior you get? To make endless decisions, choices, trade-offs. And that's fundamental to what we believe the role of communications becomes. I don't know if people know the work of, I've just blanked, the guy in London whose research on this is vital. I'll come back to it. There's some research that basically says the thing that the C-suite wants above all else is intelligence and data that helps them make decisions, that helps inform actual strategy. And of course, leaders now have to make decisions in a highly complex environment, an environment where they sit at the intersection of a range of really tough dynamics, corporate and brand reputation, the move from monologue to dialogue, leadership and communication. Consumers meeting policy, meeting business, Wall Street, K Street, and Main Street in US terms. Where culture and popular culture start to create issues that start to inform policy making, internal and external. The list goes on. You get the idea that essentially as leaders try and make choices, they find themselves at the middle of this dizzying web of complexity. And I love the thing that Bruce is going to talk about later of comms as sense-making. And so for us, where we've ended up with this is that the role of comms, which has always been about communication and engagement, which is fine and it always will be, has morphed. Is that if it's about open communication, decisive action, and personal presence, then the role of the comms function starts to be about helping leaders to decide, to act, and to engage as they go through that cycle of making business decisions, acting on them, and communicating. And therefore, for us is about helping clients achieve leadership advantage. We've ripped off Porter from the 60s, but if competitive advantage is dead, there's some of the debate around that, then there could be an interesting debate to be had about the role of comms helping leaders and corporations achieve leadership advantage. So, just to conclude, if I'm allowed to play a little video, have I got time, Bruce? You're going to be nice to me, aren't you?
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So I presented that last month, and someone actually asked me to take my shirt off, which I didn't do then, nor am I going to. The point being, we have a crisis of leadership. Comms is fundamental to solving it, and leadership ultimately is not about the leadership, it's about the movement and followers that you create. So probably more than 15 minutes. I apologise, Bruce. Over to you.
So I have to ask you, Rod, about the video. The first follower who shows other people how to be good followers, doesn't that make that follower a leader at that point?
Hence my point that leadership can and must be anybody at any level, anywhere, as opposed to per se being the leader.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here to be part of the panel this afternoon and really to share with you some of the results from phase 2 of a very large global study of leadership and public relations that was supported and carried out by the Planck Center for Leadership at the University of Alabama, Heyman Associates, and IBM. Ron mentioned the Planck Center was founded in 2005. One of its chief areas of concentration since 2005 has been on doing leadership research. We discovered in 2005 actually that there had been very little research done in the area of public relations and communication management. So we've made that a focus. Since 2005, we've conducted or funded 22 studies about leadership. Those have been good studies, but they've been relatively modest, and the focus has been entirely on the United States. So the board decided nearly 2 years ago that we wanted to take a much bigger look at leadership in public relations. After all, we live and practice in a high-speed, complexly interconnected global world. So we wanted to explore what's happening in practice and the changing context for practice. Thus, in 2012, we launched a 2-phase study in the field. And the first phase was an online survey. The 5 research questions listed here really guided our study. Understanding issues is an important starting point because issues, in fact, are context for practice, and they have a great deal to do with influencing what leaders actually do on the job. We also wanted to learn how leaders manage the issues, strategies, tactics, how issues affect leadership roles and practices and responsibilities. In addition, we wanted to capture insights about, well, what about the future? What about future leaders in our field? And we wanted to get a good sense of cultural variations. So it was a very large sample that we dealt with, and this slide gives you a sense of the scope of that study. 8 of the 10 largest economies in the world were included. The survey was done in 9 languages in 23 countries. We had a wonderful international research team of 28 individuals who carried out the study. And in the end, nearly 4,500 practitioners in these 23 countries participated in the survey. This is, in fact, the largest study of leadership that's ever been conducted in public relations. Now, the results from the survey were presented at the first Leadership Forum last November 1st here in Chicago, and they're available online at the center's website. Today I'm going to talk with you about a few of the top-line findings for Phase 2, which, as you can see here, focused on depth interviews with 137 senior leaders in 10 countries and regions, as indicated here. They were depth interviews. They ran on average about 52 minutes in length, and they were conducted largely via telephone. The interviews were grounded very much in the survey questions. We wanted to take a deeper look at issues and how they affect practice, and particularly, what do they mean day to day for leaders on the job? How do these issues come into play? We also wanted to take a close look at organizational structure and culture, which in my view we don't pay enough attention to in our education, culture and structure and the influences that they have on practice, and really discuss with these executives how they see the development of future leaders. So analysis of the interview transcripts, the country reports for the 137 interviews yielded a very comprehensive and rich set of data. There are many intriguing findings. Some of the most interesting stuff are actually, of course, in the quotations that I can't get much into today. So what I'm going to do is briefly share 5 storylines or 5 themes that come through in that data set. And the first of those is about the competitive hunt for talent. When asked to describe the key issues that keep them awake at night, these executives collectively mentioned 14 issues, many of which in fact are very similar to the top 10 issues list that I'll show you in a moment. But the senior leader said that finding, developing, and retaining top talent at all levels in the organization was the thing that kept them most awake at night. Now, in the survey, the talent issue was rated lower in the general survey, number 7 on the list here. The sample, however, was a wide range of practitioners at different levels in the organization. But for top leaders, the talent issue is a critical one. This, in fact, was mentioned in the interviews in most countries, but especially in 4 large countries: the Chinese-speaking countries, the United States, Russia, and India. Top issue. It isn't new, of course, but leaders said that globalization, the growing demands for communication professionals everywhere, and for students in the audience, this is great news. You're in demand everywhere in the world, not just here. And the digital revolution have in fact intensified this quest. Many said the issue consumes a majority of their time, and in fact it does so because it is very much a multi-dimensional issue. The executives underscored the need for new professionals to possess digital and research skills. Well, that's old news to us now. But the talent need is as great or even greater at mid and upper level management ranks. The quest for people who possess keen critical thinking skills, strategic thinking skills, problem solving, and team leadership skills, a point that Rod just mentioned. As one leader summarized it, and I quote, "I need experienced people who I can drop into Russia or China or Brazil, and they can solve problems, or they can capitalize on opportunities without my having to hold their hand or lead them through the process step by step," end quote. Another dimension is the growing training requirement to offset the increasingly short half-life of knowledge sets that our graduates come out of school with. And another dimension is retaining top talent. And here, 4 things were mentioned as being important in terms of retaining top talent. The first one was the presence of good training programs in organizations, some job autonomy, the freedom to operate on the job. Third, a sense of future possibilities in that organization. And fourth, a strong internal culture were seen as important in terms of retaining people. The second prominent theme is linked strongly to the digital revolution. Digital, in fact, magnifies and intensifies the long-time sense-making role of communication leaders. This role requires leaders to seek out information and issues in the environment that may have some impact on the organization, or information issues that may create certain opportunities for the organization. Then, to interpret and translate that back into the organization or to other publics by way of deciding what to do with the information that we have. In the earlier survey, as I mentioned, the speed and volume of information flow, or big data, along with the digital revolution, rise of social media, these were the top 2 issues for nearly 40% of the 4,500 participants in the survey. And this was true, in fact, across most countries. There are lots of sweeping implications for the profession. In fact, it's totally revolutionizing the profession. But for leaders especially, it bears on this central sense-making role. There are really 3 steps in sense-making, generally speaking. There is the sense-making step, sense-giving and sense-negotiating. I just mentioned taking in information, identifying it, bringing it inside the organization, then trying to interpret and convince others what it means from your preferred point of view, and then to enter into negotiations with others in the organization who may have different interpretations of what that information is and issues mean. This is an ongoing, endless process inside of organizations, sense-making. It's always been at the heart of leadership, but executives said consistently that the digital revolution intensified this role in some of the ways listed here and others, from increasing the size of the issue field, number of audiences to deal with, and especially reducing the cycle time that one has to effectively process information and make sense of it. Let me share a more extended version of the brief quotation that's highlighted at the bottom of this slide from practice, just to give you a sense. This comes from a communication leader in a large energy company describing her work. Quote, social media has redefined everything we do, and here's how we are managing now. We outsourced some information gathering and preparation of briefing documents. They troll information all the time. Then we, the communication team, have a really solid briefing every morning. They have a good sense. I have a team that has a pretty good sense of what to bubble up, and I have a good sense of what to bubble up, down, and out. I've had, however, to learn when to focus on information and when to be thoughtful about what to do with that information. How we've changed from 3 years ago is that there's a lot more face-to-face meetings, a lot more communication among executives to make sure that everybody is fully informed and participating in problem solving, end quote. This to me represents the multi-dimensional nature of sense-making in practice today. The third story has to do with how organizational cultures and structures influence practice and the extent to which public relations, in fact, can be effective or excellent on the job. Leaders in the field have long lamented that they don't have seats at the decision-making tables. They've long lamented that other executives in the company or organization just don't understand the true strategic value of public relations. These complaints came through quite loudly and clearly in our interviews, in only two places really, in the United States and in the German-speaking countries. Culture and structure were actually more often seen to be supportive of communication efforts rather than obstacles or obstructions to it. But in all other countries and regions, culture and structure represented constraints, and in some cases very significant constraints on practice, especially in Brazil, Mexico, Spain, Russia, and Latvia. The power of culture and structure is depicted in this simple comparison between a closed and open culture and various aspects of the public relation function. An open culture, as we know, is more inclusive, it's more participative, it's more transparent, it has a positive communication climate, it's a climate in which communication flows in many directions. Now, this clearly not only has a positive impact on public relations, but it has a great and positive impact on employee trust, engagement, retention, and productivity as well. On the other hand, in a closed culture, public relations is reduced more to a tactical or technical role. It's nice to do, but not essential. Limited resources and a lot of directive, top-down kind of communication and action. So what's the solution? Executives in those many other countries said 4 things would help. Better measures of PR value. Second, the presence of one great leader in the function. That individual who she or he could transform how others in the organization saw the communication function. Strong performance over time. And finally, possibly social media expertise. This came through especially in the Asian countries. Okay, number 14, development of future leaders. Executives said that leaders are, of course, a vital form of human capital. So how they are developed for the future, a future that's certain to be more challenging and dynamic than even the one today, is pretty crucial. However, they also indicated that leadership development was not really on the radar of organizations and professional systems. In short, leadership development is really, in their view, underdeveloped. Now, this also seemed to be the case in the survey that we did earlier. The need for improved development of leaders here also was evident. For example, participants, remember all the participants in the survey were professional PR folks, communication management people, rated the performance of their top PR leader at 4.4 on a 7-point scale, just a little bit above average performance. A leadership index that we developed also revealed great room for improvement in leadership and the conditions for leadership in all countries, a score of 14.5 on a 21-point scale. So where does development occur? Well, some individuals seize the opportunity and develop themselves and look for opportunities. Some organizations, some companies, some agencies, in fact, I think an increasing number, at least in several countries, develop people themselves. They have their internal colleges or their internal training and education programs that they use with people. Some are quite renowned for this, actually. Some leadership skills and capacities are developed in education. Critical thinking skills, for example, analytical skills, exposure to ethics and codes of ethics and moral reasoning in practice. But in all countries and regions, without exceptions, the executive said there is no mandate for, nor frankly much discussion of, future leaders in education programs or in professional association and other system structures. This leads into the last theme or storyline. We also asked the communication leaders to look ahead 10 to 15 years. They all said that was impossible. We can't look ahead 5 weeks, let alone 10 or 15 years. We asked them to do that, however, and think about how leaders in the future might differ from leaders today, given the kind of dynamic world and evolving practice that we are in. Many said that some traditional qualities and characteristics would continue, and that great leaders in the past would probably be great leaders today, and probably would be great leaders tomorrow as well. On the other hand, the executives described a number of sweeping changes and new requirements for future leaders, and their comments were fairly consistent across the country. So we pulled together those more consistent comments to create a kind of composite profile of future leaders tomorrow. And I'm going to read that to you, part of it. More public relations leader in the future will be women. Future leaders will be better educated, and a growing percentage will possess degrees in public relations or strategic communication, but they'll also have better understanding of advertising, marketing, technology, economics, and business. Continuous education and training will be required to keep up with an ever-expanding pool of knowledge. In these and other ways, future public relations leaders will be seen as business and organization leaders as well as communication leaders. Having grown up wired, future leaders will think digital first. Decision-making will grow out of analysis of mountains of data and carefully targeted research rather than intuition or past experience. Measurement will be refined, routine, and demanding. Transparency will be a practice, not an objective. Future leaders will have a global view, and a rich passport filled with experience, global experiences, and diverse projects. They will be specialists of the world rather than media specialists. Future leaders will be risk takers, firefighters, formidable change agents who push to create cultures for communication by knocking down internal barriers and driving engagement. Above all, they will be ethically branded and courageous, willing to speak truth to power and to challenge those who abuse or misuse power. Well, that's quite a compelling vision, isn't it? Quite an ambitious vision for the future. But it really begs the question in the end, and that is, how does the profession arrive at this bright future without some deep changes in perhaps how we conceptualize and develop individuals for leadership roles in the future? The interviews yielded a lot of findings, but I've highlighted just these 5 storylines or themes today. I think it's important that all of these, in fact, are global in nature. They touch practice and leadership around the world. And they are important food for thought and discussion for practitioners and educators, especially with respect to the development, I think, of future leaders. At the Planck Center, we believe that leadership, in fact, it's too important to take for granted. We need to devote more time to discussing and evaluating public relations leadership. What it is, what it means, how we measure it, and how we develop it for the future. Leadership, in fact, we think should be at the center of our professional dialogue, not in the margins, in fact, where it's been for some period of time. Okay? For more about the study, you can visit the Planck Center website. We also have coming out in the spring a book that is a comprehensive report on the survey and on the interviews at the same time. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Mang, Dr. Mang from the University of Georgia, for a quick summary of what she thought she heard. I don't know how she's going to do it, but she has 5 minutes to get up here and tell us what she thought. And then we get a break.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks, presenters. Great study, a lot of information. 5 minutes. I've heard a lot, so well, I can exchange notes with you guys later. I was very busy taking notes page after page, okay? So I'm going to do today, within 5 minutes, is to highlight the key points that I've learned from the 3 great presenters based on the 3 great global studies. Hopefully, we'll exchange more information later. So from study 1, the study of communication leaders in Europe, what have we learned? We've learned that the communication of the CEOs and other senior executives generates a huge impact on the stakeholders' perception of organizational reputation, of course. So it is very important for us as the communication leaders to help CEOs and other senior executives to position themselves on behalf of the organization and competence at the different levels, individual, personal, cognitive, like Ansgar presented, to in the media, both traditionally as well as in new media, the social media channels. But how can we do this? It will be more effective, efficient, and also consistent if we can develop specific communication strategies and also instruments to help, to support, and even to lead them in the communication process as well as the positioning process. So, of course, this is not easy, as the complex nature of the profession itself and the information age we are living in now. We need to do a lot. How can we help them to get attention with limited time in the media and also across different time zones? The message we delivered here today in the US can be comprehended by people in China next day, okay? So, effective communication management with organic organizational structure, sensitive strategies, and stakeholder-focused and stakeholder-centered will open the communication internationally and also globally. And what we've learned from study 2, the Ketchum Leadership Communication Monitor, first one, people do care, and they care considerably about the quality of leadership and the leadership communication demonstrated by the organizations. But let's take a step back. What is the role of communication in leadership, especially for us as the communication specialists? What can we do to facilitate positive leadership? And how can positive leadership perceptions drive for great business performance at the end of the business day? So the answer is positive leadership communication comes from all levels across the organization. Employees, teams, small teams, big teams, managers, medium level managers, senior manager team, or even senior executive, the top leadership team, across all levels and across different sections within the organization. Such open communication, consistent communication, decisive action, trustworthy, personal presence build up today's credible leadership as well as tomorrow's leaders. Okay. And from study 3, I was very lucky to get involved in the global project from the beginning of the idea until the book manuscript. So from the second phase of the global study of leadership, we've learned the number one thing we need is great leaders. We need highly talented professionals to be developed into future leaders in all different sections, both here in the US as well as other countries and regions across the globe. So it is very important for us to think about effective leadership development approaches through organizations and professional associations, as well as higher education, like I am the professor, to teach students how to be a great leader in the future, or to other advanced educational programs through multiple institutions. More importantly, we need to advocate for an open culture for communication within the organization to facilitate integrity, engagement, and leadership development. That is the vision for us to act now in order to achieve great leadership for tomorrow. So a lot of information covered by the three great presenters based on their leadership project, communication project across different countries and regions. Well, that's my 5-minute condensed thoughts. Of course, we've learned more than the 5-minute summarization, and I'd be happy to discuss more. And of course, we'll have open discussion when we come back from the break. So thank you very much again for your attention.